So a little bit about where we're coming from with it. I'm with a firm that's based out of New York. I come from the Chicago office, but we've got offices all over the globe. We'll talk about that in a second. But we're really a technology consultant. So I'm not going to sell you anything. If you're looking for somebody that you can connect to that's going to figure out how this esports stuff works and how much we're going to sell you, that ain't me. Go on down the hall. Our job is to work with the architects and the clients and to help them really understand what it is that they can do, how to go about it, and then how to build the space that's going to house it. That's really where we come from at the end of the day. We got, I would say 14 global offices. I think we're a little bit better than that right now. But we are around the globe. We spend a lot of time dealing with various marketplaces that we get into, from education to corporate to government to entertainment to airlines. We do a lot of work with the airlines and airports around the country as well. So the disciplines that we work with as a consultant starts with, and we're going to get into the acoustics discussion about what that means for esports, audiovisual, obviously with this, information technology, and we wrap IT infrastructure and IT systems into that. So that everything from the wire that comes out of the hole, or out of the wall, to the technology that sits behind that, okay? Physical security, another big one we'll get into in this discussion about what that means for the space that you're working with and how you're gonna secure that. And then, oh, by the way, medical equipment planning, which doesn't apply to any of this kind of stuff. So just a little bit about where we're coming from and a little bit of a challenge in terms of the history of esports. And I don't think if I give a quiz, I don't think we're gonna have a lot of answers for it that are gonna help. But believe it or not, it started back in '47. How many of you guys were around back then? Not me, that's for sure. I'm kind of getting there, but not that close. But really, it was a gameplay called Tennis for Two. It was an electronic version in '47. There weren't even a lot of TVs back then. Then we jumped all the way to the '60s and we went into Space War. That was a movie that was out in the '70s or early '80s. The '70s, then when we got into the tournament play with Atari. Everybody knows about the Ataris, right? We all had one of those things, or if we didn't, we knew somebody that did. So I mean, this thing goes back that far. But when you play with it and look at the rest of the timeline in the '80s, finally they started building that the players were becoming something that could compete against each other and start working and playing together and really kind of understanding how they could get recognized. Again, not in any major extreme like we are now, but certainly something that was rather unique and kind of fun. '90s, then that's where we really got going, because that's when the internet took off. '80s kind of got there, the old dial-up internet modules. That was, the old dial-up modems. Boop, 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 boop. Well, '90s turned that out the door, so now gaming got to go. So now we jump all the way to the 2000s. South Korea actually was the dominant force that really looked at how they could take that game and make it huge and make it dynamic and compete across the internet, which is kind of fun in itself. And you look at that, 2000s. In Korea, we don't hear about them right now doing it. So it really was becoming something that was going around all around the globe at that point. And they were finally building that out so that they could build that phenomenon to where it is now. Now we go to the 2010s. So we go to 2000s all the way to 2010s, 10 years later. Oh, wow, a time frame in education in the esports industry and in technology. But you start looking at that, and now people are starting to sponsor it. So there's money involved. And this is the fun part now. This is what drives everything in the world that we do. It's all money. So who's going to play the game? Who's going to make the money? So we start looking at that, and in terms of where that streaming started was 2011. Not the Twitch that we have today. It was all dial up into single modems, and we went through and built it based on that. So first things that came out, League of Legends, Fortnite. And we all hear of those today. They're still the big guns that are out there, but they started in 19 and 20. That came out of the thing. So over $100 million for the prize pool in 2019, and 2 million spectators. Remember those two numbers, because we're going to play on that as we come into the next few slides here. That's just the genesis. 100 million in game profits, monies, and 2 million viewers. Phenomenal number when you think about it. But we come up now to where it's come, and it's exploded way beyond that. It isn't just a game, though, that we play at home on the weekends, and once in a while, if we get somebody over and we have a little party or something. That's not where this thing has gone anymore. It's gone way beyond that. It's actually looking at being, as I noted here, multifaceted development of the entire ecosystem of athletics. So we just don't think about kids sitting down behind their Atari machine and playing the game with it. They're playing it enough now. It's not just kids, it's adults too. I can't release that. They're playing enough now that we have to start looking at the ecosystem around them. The chairs, the tables, the monitors, the headsets, the devices, and what that does to their bodies, okay? There's a whole medical system right now that's studying what esports is doing to kids and vice versa. And we're starting to call these, instead of gamers, athletes, because they really are. When you think about how long they're spending, 16, 18 hours sometimes a day, 4 to 6 hours daily, practicing, rehearsing, playing and sharpening their craft, that becomes wear and tear on the body. So it rolls into that thing. So we're starting to see this now with K-12 through the colleges and universities. Okay, there's money out there, so who's going to jump on it? The education team. They're going to get into this thing, and they're going to figure out how we can capitalize on it, because if we do this and we become the known school for entertainment, for sports involvement, and we'll look at all the other aspects that stem off of this, that feed off of this, we can bring more students to the school. We can bring more kids in. What does that mean to the school? It's profits. Easy. No big deal. But to get to that point now, it's the sponsorships that have to play into that thing. And they have to have the kids with it. So really, like that traditional sports, people watch the person. So it isn't just the gamers now anymore. It isn't just the athletes. It's those sponsors, those people that are sponsoring it that we talked about, that $100 million back in 2011, and 2 million people that are now becoming an avenue for revenue, an avenue for expansion, and an avenue to be able to find more people to get involved. So it's blowing up in our face right now. 2023, the most watched esports tourney ever. Remember 2011, we had viewership at over 6.4 million people. That was a 25% increase from the year prior, from 2022. So it's phenomenal where that's gone. So let's look at the revenue now. Remember those early numbers, 10 million and 2 million. $1.39 billion in 21. By 25, they're looking at 1.89 billion. So this little thing came off from playing Atari and Pac-Man into this global thing now that's really taken hold. One thing that you'll see as a theme come out of here, it isn't just the big venues. And that's where this whole thing wants to focus on. These are smaller venues that are playing in this thing. The big venues, you see, the $100 million, that might be up in Minneapolis at the Dome. It could be in New York at their sports facility in the Knicks Stadium. These are the big ones. They travel from place to place to place. There was one in Denver here a couple months ago. But the groundswell of this is coming in K-12 through universities. So it's something to watch at. But you start looking at 200 million hours of people watching League of Legends. 200 million hours? It's not just sitting in a conference room or a classroom anymore. This is going crazy when you start looking at that. 1.8 billion streaming hours. This is 2023. It went up since then. And when you start looking at consistent viewership growth since 2022, 1.8 times each year it grows that much more. So how do we, the world starts looking at this saying, okay, how do we build these venues? How do we find room for these gamers, these athletes? And how do we deal with streaming? And how do we deal with the purse money? And it just kind of grows from there as you can see this thing coming. It's to the point now, today, where 270 colleges and universities are offering scholarships. So the early discussion about, there's money in this, they see it. So they're going to look for sponsorships, they're going to look for the students, they're going to provide the scholarships, they're going to bring back in more students, more scholarships, more support, and build that college and university around it. K-12 isn't quite to that level, nor can they be, but what we're finding at K-12 is private schools. Public schools are one thing. They're trying to build out. In fact, I've got one client in Chicago building out 2 libraries in a K-12 Chicago public schools. Each library is only 1,100 square feet, so it's 10 by 11, small space. They're going to put gaming in there, but it's also the same computers they're going to use to look up the book list. Okay, so it's doubling up on it. But when you start looking at that number of schools, the fact that over 2,000 of them have esports teams, and that's growing by the day. That number is actually a void number at this point. 18,000 or 14,000 of them have football teams. So football, and we all know this, we might not say it out loud, but football brings money into campuses. That's why they do football, that's why they do basketball, that's why they do baseball. It's a great team sport, and it fills out the school. But now we see 14,000 of them with football alone, and only 2,000 of them with scholarships. You can see where this is going. Kind of played out from there. You take a look at 18,000 students from 800 unique institutions competing in Star League in 2023. Remember that first conversation? How many kids were involved in that? 2,000, and where it's going now. So one of the things that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through how this thing evolves and what's into it is the discussion about the growth of not only the sport itself, but the growth of the portable use. There's chip manufacturers in China and the US right now that are designing chips that are coming to market, which will advance the speed and the flexibility of the cell phone to be able to play a competitive game on your cell phone, as opposed to having necessarily something at your desktop. So keep that in mind as you go down the path here too. So as we look at that industry, how does that equate into what are we doing to build the spaces out, and how do we build those spaces? So having that background, now we can understand about that growth, which is a key to the whole discussion about where this thing is going. And if you're looking at building something or helping a customer build something, it isn't just build it for today. You got to build it for tomorrow. And there's some tricks inside of here we'll play with on that. So as we look at that space, maximize the capacity today and leave space for growth tomorrow. Because if you put 5 stations in today, you're going to have 12 by the end of the year. And if you have 12, you're going to have 20 the next year. Because it's going to get popular. Kids, students, athletes, whether it's on school time, whether it's on their private time, whether they're a part of a team. These things are starting to build. They're starting to grow. Some of that recruitment and sponsorship opportunities are out there now. This is whether it's private or public, whether it's school or if it's a team organization. There's enough sponsorship out there right now, and Coke just got involved big time in esports. They're sponsoring teams, they're sponsoring organizations, and they're sponsoring events. So Coke is going to do that, Pepsi's right behind them, and where does it go from there? It's just going to continue to grow. 2 years ago, the industry was looking at, okay, we've got all this excitement about where we're going, what we're doing, how we're going to build these spaces out, but where are we going to find the money? So the industry grew faster than the sponsorship did. Kind of an interesting thing itself. They played catch up. Now, with Coke coming in, some of these others coming right behind it, the energy drinks are all over this. And you've got NASCAR in it. And you've got a lot of the football teams in it. And you've got a lot of the baseball teams in it. That's kind of the stuff. That's the kind of stuff that's going to help build this and expand it even more. So don't plan for 10. Don't plan for 15. Plan to go for 25 as you expand your space. The spaces we're designing right now, as a design consultant, are designed for 2 things. Either one, it's a temporary space. Might be 5 years, but it's a temporary space because we know it's going to expand. Or we're next to a space that can be vacated and we can expand. So either temporary and we're going to move it, or expand it. Every single one of them. And there's a couple here that we'll take a look at that are 15 students. But we've got space to go to 25 right away. So looking at that evolution, really you've got to kind of have a vision for where you're going. Some of that's going to be your customer or your own systems as you start planning yourself. What have you got for space? What are you going to do to expand that space if you need to? if you're successful with it, and how do you find that? So let's start looking at some of these components in itself. And some of the images that are here are kind of wild images. They're all real, obviously, but you know, some of these go off the deep end in terms of high-end space. And I've got some smaller ones in here too that are more realistic for you. But those components, as you start looking at the space, certain modules in here are must-haves. Other modules are nice-to-haves. And still other modules are, well, when we get there, we'll do that. Okay, so the must-have modules, we start looking at that. You've got to have the gaming space itself, obviously. That's where the action takes place. You're going to need some board space eventually, which is, if you're going beyond just gaming and electronic gaming, board games are coming back again. I saw a couple of different stores out there now that are coming back alive in games, board games, believe it or not. It becomes a practice for the electronic games, so it's a feeder. If you can understand the logic of the board game and you can play the board game well enough and deep 3-4 moves ahead, much like chess, you're planning 3-4 moves ahead in the board game, you can translate that into the e-game very quickly, because that's what it is too. You're planning multiple steps ahead, but you don't necessarily have the pressure of somebody coming down your back and playing shoot 'em up. You know, the board game's a little slower that way. So, consoles, gaming consoles. You need to understand what the standard practice stations are, what the standards are. So if you're going to go into a sporting environment, League of Legends has a different set of requirements than Fortnite, different standards. They can be modified on the run, but if you're setting up for a Fortnite competition, there's a set of standards, and your drivers, your computer network, and your file systems on your PCs is set up one way. If you're going to Fortnite, if you're going to League of Legends, it's a little bit different. The setup is different. So what we found most people do is they'll set both programs on their primary computer, their computer drive and network, and their PCs. They'll set up two separate domains on the hard drives, so they can just reboot to the domain instead of having to unload one program, reload the next program, set your RAM, your ROM, and your speeds. Just set up two separate or three separate domains on your PC, which is a big component in itself. Many stations or many locations use a varsity area and a general competition area. So if you look at layering how these things are built, the varsity is going to have a little bit better fit and finish. It's going to have a little bit nicer look to it, a little bit better feel to it. The non-varsity or the game playing areas where you put the masses in, you know, you're going to have people in there that are probably going to be sitting there with energy drinks, with beer, coffee, soda, whatever you do, popcorn, snacks. So those machines are probably going to get beat up a little bit more than the varsity machines would for that reason, because of that. So the types of games you got to look at whether it's recreational, which is where we just were, or if it's a competitive. And a lot of times you put the two together in the same space, because now you've got the space there. Well, let's use it to a place that's going to be much more realistic for you. In the education world, that becomes varsity. Some of the other things that we look at are those green rooms. If we get into a lot of spaces where we're going into competition and we've got multiple teams playing, green rooms are the staging area. So the warm-up area, if you will. They can sit down, they can have their team meetings, they can play with whatever. They can monitor what's going on in the main room like any other green room would do. But it's off stage, so they're not in the middle of the mix itself. Another area is the broadcast control, streaming. There is a lot to be made and a lot to be expanded with gaming, or with streaming. Your viewership, remember that 2 million going up to 6.9 billion because of the streaming. And people will watch this thing hours after hours after hours. I was watching here a couple of weeks ago. It's a video game actually, where they're running in Las Vegas. They're running the drones, but they're doing it electronically. And these guys, they're running drones for miles. They can't see them because they're monitoring that drone camera along with this course camera, and then you've got offshore seeing what's going on with that by monitoring that as well. So drones, it's a video game. Who would have thunk? But broadcast control, somebody's got to manage those signals, those cameras, those sources. And it isn't just video, it's audio. So you're going to listen to your player or that player's team. You're going to listen to the competitor's player, and you're going to have that background sound of what's going on in the game, the game music itself or the game sounds, and you're going to be watching what's going on around the two of them. Hearing it, seeing it. It's all part of the experience of the viewer, which is why people love to stream and watch this stuff, because of the experience that's there. You're watching somebody else getting ready to shoot the bejeebers out of somebody, and somebody else trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to get there sooner? That's what it's all about. That's the fun of the thing itself. But when you start looking at, to our discussion about staging and colors before, think of any of these spaces, whether it's 5 stations or 50 stations, think of it in the theatrical experience. Lighting, color, sound, and certainly visual. They all roll together in this sport, more so than you're going to find in most any other sport together. But they all fit. So, and one of the other things here too is, didn't get into there, VR gaming. Virtual reality, augmented reality. We're doing a space in a building in Chicago right now which will have a VR space that's larger than the gaming space, because they're looking at putting that many people into the VR domain and compete. So it's a blank space. It's a black room. It doesn't need a lot for fit out, but with VR, you can paint that room to what you need it to be. So it's not a lot to be able to build out and make that happen. Some of those other kinds of components, you're going to have observation. This particular space was set small because it was team management observation, not guest management, guest observation. So as a team manager, I've got a dedicated line to my audio team, or audio feed, my video feed, and the cameras on each one of the workstations, so I can monitor my entire team. Back broadcast, somebody has to manage those signals going where they need to be. So I'm not watching my competitors, or my competitors not watching me, I'm watching my own team. So there's observation that's involved here too. Flex space, we talked about having room to expand and grow. That's flex space. One of the ones we're using in Chicago now is building that as board space, board games. That'll become an esports facility once they get expanded. Training spaces, I can't broadcast green screen. If you're doing broadcast, how many of you seen esports? Okay, so with broadcast, you've got an announcer someplace that's in the middle of this thing, right? They're generally probably in front of a green screen, or they've got a really well-developed space where they're in a glass cube, and you can see what's going on. But that sets the tone for the entire space itself. It sets the tone for the streaming that's going on to the backside of it. So let's look at some of those technologies in terms of where they're coming from. On the broadcast side, we've got all the cameras, we've got all the switching, we've got all the signal routing, all the signal management. Same thing with the audio that goes with all that thing. It isn't just one microphone or 2 or 3. If you've got 15 players, you've got 15 audio sources. You probably got 30 audio sources, because you've got not only their microphone out the room, but you've got the audio from their computer system. Now, take the cameras. You've got cameras watching them from the front. You've got cameras watching them from multiple angles from the back and sides. Somebody's got to manage those. Now you interject those signals going not only to my manager, or the control observation point, but down to the house, for those observers in the house, as well as the streaming. Now, one of the things that we're starting to get into now is that those sources become dynamic. So it isn't just somebody sitting in a control room saying, okay, the house, you're going to have 15 monitors, and you're going to have 15 signals, and this is what you're going to get. The viewer is starting to get smart to the point where they can tell the system which signal they want to view by an app. So you got 15 players. I want to watch player number 2 because he's beating my guy. I want to see these girls. I can dial into his camera, his audio. I can't do anything other than play it, but I can do that. That's what the broadcasting is, because I've got to be able to manage that through routers. Much of that's network these days, because it's hybrid network, but you got to manage the equipment for that. Audience viewing, we've got to talk about the low-tech gaming we talked about. So what we're finding is chess is a good one. And this started a few years ago too. Chess became big in the
regular broadcast TV market. That's becoming a component now in esports because you can see what that is doing in the broadcast market. So in esports now, how does it change? We're streaming because now we can look at different angles. We can analyze the game by the announcers. We can just take a look at what the next move is, or we can superimpose what last game did in the same draw to see what this game's going to do versus the last game or the next. So it becomes a multi-layered thing. I'm sorry, I'm messing up your camera. It becomes a multi-layered thing that starts to add a whole other dimension to what chess is. And that's chess. Do the same thing with Monopoly. Whatever Monopoly, not a big board game player. But all that stuff gets streamed. One of the things we talked about, and we'll come back to again as well, but acoustics. In these spaces, if you've been in live events, they get noisy. You get a lot of people. They get really noisy. There can be problems with competition if the audience sees what's happening with the competitor and starts to elaborate on that, gets noisy about it. Hey, look out, what's going on here? And now the competitor can hear that. Plays on that. You don't want that with acoustics. You got to block that off. Many of them with the headsets, that'll do some of that, but not all of it. You still got to have some discussion about building the space out acoustically and treating the space acoustically so that it will help augment what you're trying to do with your headsets. Some guys don't know that headsets either, so that's an even bigger problem. The reverberation, isolation, and vibration are all keys. So it's not just the physical space. Take a look at that. It starts looking at the things that you can't see, but they go bump in the night. So, what are some of those things that you need to look at before technology? Technology is a given here, but we need to make sure that the space can accommodate the technology, not the other way around. Remember that if you take nothing else from today, technology comes after the space, but the two of them need to work together, not the other way around. So, platforms, what kind of curriculum, if you're in education, what kind of gaming are you going to compete on? Well, what are those platforms? What are the computers that you need to use for that? What do they have to have along with them? And how do you set up this different login setup so they can accommodate different games without having to reprogram the computers? That happens. What about the resource needs? That's where your network comes in as well. We're seeing most college, high school networks, anything more than about 4 or 5 students or 4 or 5 athletes, we're putting fiber right to the desktop. Not a lot of colleges and universities are used to it. So it becomes a discussion. But the bigger problem, I had one in New York here about a year ago, changing over a college dorm, universal room, commons room, into an esports facility. Perfect place for it. Nice place to get started and build on it. We took a look at what feeds and what services were coming into the building in terms of bandwidth, in terms of availability of internet capabilities there. And we could build the building out just great for them. We didn't have enough coming into the building. We had to go all the way back to the net pump, because familiar with net pump. We had to go all the way back to the edge of the campus and find another service provider that could give them more bandwidth. So a new spectrum. Became a rather convoluted thing to do, but without that, as a competitor, they would have been sitting on their toes the whole time. Would have helped them a bit. As you find some of the games that the users are taking, become familiar with what those league requirements are, because they're going to belong to a league somewhere. There's probably 30 different leagues out there right now. They all have different requirements in terms of what do you have to provide for speed and for space, so that you become an NCAA to us, and NCAA is into the game too, by the way. So space, technology, certainly the athlete's capabilities become a requirement. They all kind of roll together, so that's something that needs to be looked at very carefully too. So the well discussion, well meaning health. That's a big, big issue again. Don't lose track of that. One of the things that's driving esports above all other sports is inclusivity. We're finding a lot of people that are on the spectrum, a lot of people that have physical limitations. They can excel in esports. So it's something to be aware of and look at. So, getting down the line here, all the pieces that fit together in this thing. Acoustics, we come back to that. The reason we need acoustics is player feet, player fatigue, and comfort. You don't want to sit down behind these things 8, 10 hours a day. If you do, have fun. I can't. But it becomes an acoustical comfort. So all the noise in their ears are why some people will take headsets off and go on. Isolation between players and the audience, we spoke of earlier, big key because it potentially gives an edge to a competitor that the other team doesn't want, or you wouldn't want something else happening. So how do we manage that acoustically? It can be a big discussion. Because headsets only do so much. You can still block things off. And an audience speech recognition. So the audience needs to understand what the players are saying. They're screaming, talking back and forth to each other, they're coding all the way through the line. But if the audience can't understand that, it's no jumping, they'll lose interest. So it isn't just the gamers and the athletes that need to hear each other well. Again, the audience does as well. So audio systems are extremely important, and the audio systems go back to the acoustic. You can design a hell of an audio system if you have a room that's got a 4.5% reverb, 4.5 reverb attachment to it. Audio system's not going to do squat. So they've got to work together. And finishes and shapes of the room, they really talk to that whole thing because that's where it fits together. That's where you get into the acoustics, you get into the space, start looking at lighting, start looking at the environment itself, because these spaces are environments. They're a specific feel when you walk into it. That's your brand. That's what you're really trying to work with. Again, player team communications isn't just player to player. It isn't just one player that does the rest of the players to the entire team. So if you've got a high ambient noise level space and everybody's using microphones, you got to control how much sound there is before the threshold of the microphone opens up. And now you've got everybody listening to the whole audience out there, or the other team screaming at each other. You can't hear yourself. So some microphones give you the ability with an audio system that you can, instead of threshold before it opens up the mic, sometimes the sound level gets so noisy there you can't use that because it's too loud. So how do you control it? Sound. That's a big question. Sound. How do you get the sound to the game? Going into the headsets, hopefully. But if it's not managed to the audience, they can't hear it. They're not happy. So it's the audience experience, which is very, very important. It's actually equally, in my mind, it's equally as expected, as important as the experience of the player. Because if the audience who's paying the bill isn't happy, they're not going to show up. And if they don't show up, your sponsors aren't happy because they're not selling something. And that's where it goes from there. So the broadcasting and streaming audio, that all feeds from this. It's all the output where this goes. Space planning, shapes. I put this image in here specifically because it looks at how do we take a noisy room, a loud room, a reverberant room, and make it look good to an architect. Ultimately, the other guys are having shit. So sometimes you got to play the game in terms of what goes on your wall, how the walls get fuzzed up. You can see at the far end, we've got the vertical sections of the wood pads, very stuff, acoustical, but with camera extension, so they kind of like it. But you've got to look at all those things from the early part on with your architect or from your construction company or to do it in the physical building. It starts then, and it starts looking at all these pieces as they build into it. So those acoustical panels, those bass traps, they're hidden inside of here. You can't really see them except for the bass traps at the far end of the room, but they become part of the architecture. Diffusers off the ceiling, same thing as the bass trap with their diffuser that bounces, recovers and reduces the bounce. Solid-proof curtains. A lot of times these spaces are going to be makeshift spaces from something else. So we start looking at some heavy-duty theatrical acoustical curtains that can fold shut and expand. Allow the audience to open up and see it or close it down if there's no audience there. You can use that space for something else. That's doable. It's not the same as a good acoustical fixed wall, but it'll get you something. Isolation pads is another thing. We're starting to see PCs either go on the floor, which is not really should go, or on the table with an isolation pad, because there's so much hammering going on. So those are programs. Kind of cool. So the equipment, gaming PCs, obviously, and depends on what you're playing. They're going to have requirements that you need to have for your PC, so be aware of that. Same thing with the monitors. What's the refresh rate? What's the resolution? What's the size that you want to have and you need to have people play with? Keyboards, mice are not your standard off-the-shelf $20 units. Sorry, guys. They're going to be expensive. But they're going to take the abuse, they're going to take the beat, and they're going to have the refresh rate that they're going to need for the game. High resolution again. Headsets, gaming headsets, there are probably half a dozen out there that most of the guys use. Get used to them if this is where if you're providing this as part of what you're building out for your customers or for yourself. Get used to them because they are not cheap either, but they're built to take more than all. High resolution quality for the webcams. This is something a lot of people won't think about right away. The webcams that sit on top of the monitors for player view, not just a $20, $30 off the shelf camera. It wants to have a little bit of a wider angle to it. It wants higher resolution to it. And it's going to take a little less. It's going to take some more dollars to buy it, but it's not just $20 camera. So put money into it, might as well put it in wide, right, to make it work because it's going to be streamed. And it's a low res camera that's looking good on the monitor, but you go and stream it. That's not worth the price of the camera. The audience systems. If you're involved in it or not, you've got to make a recommendation to the person that is involved, whether it's an architect or an user or a customer or whatever, comfortable seating. These guys, whether it's an audience or whether it's a game or an athlete, seating is important. And it's not just comfortable, it's organized. Because armrests so high, I think the slide we had, the slides ago, start looking at, armrest height becomes a real important discussion. And it starts to look at some of the supports around the lower back. Monitor height becomes a real important discussion in terms of how high the chair sits and the eye to monitor the distance ratio. Very important. Very important. So again, carpal tunnel, that table top and the chair top and the armrest need to be managed together. Important things that work. Signal audio distribution, okay. High quality, wide diversity system in terms of audience. It's not just a stereo, monophonic sound system that's rolled throughout the space. You're going to want to add some stereophonic too. How you do that, or why you do that, is because your teams will be opposing each other. So you want the sound from this team on that side of the house, the sound from this team on that side of the house. So you're going to play that off a little bit to each other. And it adds another dimension for the user experience better. Guest internet connections. If these people are coming in as guests to watch this game, they're going to be there for hours, and they're not going to sit there just taking pictures of what's going on up front. They're going to be broadcasting out. They're going to be tweeting out. They're going to be texting out. They're going to be using the internet. So you've got to have some decent bandwidth in there for your internet connection for the guests. Signal audio distribution. There's some guys here that can help get you started. It isn't just a 20-port switch. That's probably for the first 3 or 4 people. It's going to be substantial. And the cable plant that goes with that and the room that goes with that is going to be substantial. So plan your IT closets accordingly because they're going to be pretty substantial. So, vacuums heat. So we've got to look at that. Air conditioning fans. Software. A couple of them here is OBS and XSplitter. There's 2 of them that I picked out. There's half a dozen software programs that will manage this program in the live stream for you. There's a number of them. There's a few here that I think that you probably would start to talk to as well. Quality mics. It isn't just the boom mic necessarily. It's mics above the play area, the game area. It's above the audience area. Because as a streamer, if you're watching this on a stream, you want to hear all of this background. So you've got the ambience. Okay? That's what you want those microphones to pick up beyond just these microphones off the phone. So it adds to that experience again. So lighting, we were talking earlier, lighting sets the mood, sets the tone, sets the entire experience on. Before you turn a computer on, it sets that brand, that experience in one. That's what you want. With that lighting, it doesn't come up here, it's the acoustics that go into that space. Try walking into a gymnasium and then try to walk into a band. The difference you feel with this, it's the acoustics that deal with those 2 spaces and the feeling, the experience that goes with that is what you're trying to set for your audience before they even see somebody come in. What cameras? These are looking at cameras that are not the gaming cameras so much, looking at the audience cameras. Because what do you see in a football, basketball, baseball game that kind of adds a little excitement to it? What's the audience do? Yeah, you got the wave going on. So let's see that. Let's play it out. That adds to your broadcast side because now your broadcasters that are doing the commentary are going to play on it. So plan on it. You got to use it. Green screen, again, we talked about that briefly. That's for your control room, your control, your audience, your presenters, your gamers that are doing the announcing need to have something that's not just a whiteboard. We tried a couple places to put them out in the hall, in the space. Problem is you can't control the audio. And every time they use their microphone, you're hearing everything else in the room. So it needs to be a separated space. It's got to have some useful isolation, separation to it. But it wants to have either clear glass behind it, which can be a lighting nightmare, or it needs a green screen behind it, which is a little easier to deal with, less expensive. And your computers, your primary computer for streaming, capture cards. A couple in here. I did put it on to back off. There's a dozen capture cards out there, but if you're going to be tweeting it, find out what they use best. If you're going to be using Max Screen, find out what they use best, and use those so you don't have angles. Broadcast systems, we talked about it briefly. HD video switchers and mixers are key to this whole thing working well. Sound and special effects become part of that, so you can do your phase and wipes and distribution across them. Sometimes we do a layer over the top, where we start looking at, again, more layering the last game above this game, and what they did for the moves, so you can see the two together and watch them kind of look at strategies. Become really important. The digital audio mixture, the microphones, broadcast software, vMix, Wirecast are probably two of the bigger ones that you see up there now. HD cameras, again, for the audience as well as for the player itself. Cameras need tripods and stabilizers. I don't know how many were in the opening address this morning. One of the things he came up with was tripods and stabilizers for the camera. They're important. So where are you going to mount these cameras to? You can't swing them all from the ceiling. You're going to take some portables, how you're going to deal with that. Cameras, cables, converters, all that stuff that goes bump in the night, all included. They all fit inside of this thing. But that's where it really becomes important to bring these pieces together. That IT infrastructure, design considerations for that. Really look at identifying the user experience, the user experience, the user experience. What is the user going to take away from this? And the user in this particular vernacular, because not only the audience, but the athletes too. What's the experience? How much are we going to be drawing on this thing? If you look at, just put in the analogy of a hose of water. Are you going to take a 3/4 inch hose and try to water an entire barnyard with it? It's not going to happen. You need a bigger hose. Or how many hoses? So you see how much, that all equates to the infrastructure, cable plant, and wire, and some of these things. Can't put a number to it to equate to X means Y, but if you don't look at it early on, it's going to be a problem for it. And support and maintenance. One of the things that early on we found a few people that were looking at this saying, okay, I'm just going to build the computers, we'll build the space up, put it in, we'll put everybody here, we'll subscribe to them, they go nuts, they can have fun. And then things started breaking down about 2 months later. They didn't think about it. They didn't plan for it financially, and they didn't plan space for it or teams to manage it. So plan on how you're going to support and maintain this thing, because it's a wild beast. And get away from it. Radio system checks, big key. IT infrastructure looks at performance, looks at reliability, looks at security. Okay, you can't afford to have the system go down, because if it goes down in the middle of any one game, you just lost all your credibility, and you're going to go somewhere else, and you're not going to go back, because they might have been a person that they were really getting close to winning, and they lost it. So look at that performance and reliability. However you build this out, don't take the cheap route, because the system's going to take a beating. If anything, it's got to be built to last. It's the IT infrastructure and the network that feeds it. Security is along with it, though. We've seen, and you've probably heard of a number of instances recently where, in the last probably 6 months now, where people have gotten into the network via remote and shut the system down. somebody opened up the password, somebody let the wrong person answer the email, whatever it was, they got it and shut the email out. Something happened about 2 months ago. Not a comfortable situation. So if you're not capable, if you don't have that capability in your bag of tricks, find somebody that does. Cybersecurity and network security are two big components that are becoming very, very interesting to people that don't want to sit back and just really find it. Look out for that one, that's a big one. Network systems, space. Distance, that's another key. If you're running copper, a lot of people do to a certain point, fiber beyond that. Distance is the key to the discussion. If you can afford to run fiber all the way from point to point, it's probably your best bet, because it's going to be long lasting. It's going to be way more than copper's going to do if you're running Cat 7. If you're running that, that's great for today, but bucket glass is still going to go down. So find that out. Understand there's CPUs, there's GPUs that all have to fit inside that thing. All those network interface cards, they're built specific for gaming. It's not something that just came from the office and repurposed. That'll last for about a day. Power distribution of power UPSs, surge protectors. You guys all know computers, you have surge protectors, power distribution. It's equally as important. Same thing with cable patching and routing. If you're going to run network, you're probably going to be running IP network. Most of some of this is still going to be physical patching just to get you in certain areas that can be a lot less expensive. Routers, switchers, wireless hubs, all those fun things. And when you get done with it, all those cables and things go back to routers. That's that IT closet discussion we talked about before. The one we're doing in Chicago right now is one of the first images I showed you. It's gaming. It's got space for, I think, 30 gamers, 15 on each team, with the VR and the AR sitting alongside of it. That building is about 80 feet long. And it's at that gaming point. The stage is about 80 feet long. That's raised up for it. The entire IT data center sits under the lip of that stage and runs all 80 feet. So not just 4 or 5 cabinets and 10 by 10 closet. So that's 30 games. So look out for that. Are they going to use it all day one? No, I think we populated about half of it with the expansions. So play with it. Security considerations. It's a competitive environment. Physical security can also ensure the integrity of the game. And if it doesn't, if you haven't moved to somebody to help you with that, please do. Data security is the other side. Because if they lock up the game, you're screwed. And the results of those games and all the data that goes into that is right along with it. But you also want to make sure that you have the integrity of that separate from the rest of the house and your audience. If they can tap into it, it gets a major problem. Insurance is a big one. There's, we just ran into this a while ago where the cybersecurity world has been kind of evolving and growing in the last 2 years. It's really caught on. But as a consultant, now we need to carry cybersecurity insurance. As a consultant, as an integrator, there's going to be another layer of insurance that you're going to need to look at and talk to your insurance company about. It's not just your errors and omissions. It's not just your liability. Specific data insurance, data loss insurance. So beware of that, because it's going to be a costly thing as well. As you look at your security system, physical security now beyond the data security, start looking at some of that, identifying the risks. Parking lots. Where's the parking lot? What's the walk space and the time? How do they get to the building? And once they get to the building, how do they move from point A to point B to point C? Those risk assessments become important. The more you add to what the purse is that people are running, the more you bring in larger teams. But because teams and people tend to get a little squirrely when the purse gets bigger. So look at it. It's not expensive to do a risk assessment. Look at those vulnerabilities and threats. Try to plan in how this thing works out. It could be as simple as one of the things that we've seen happen is around the front door of the building, put bullets. Okay, so you don't like the look of bullets. It's going to stop a car from coming. But you don't like the look of it. So we went this to one particular location. We had a scenario where we put what we call ha-ha walls. You guys have not seen a ha-ha wall, but a ha-ha wall is actually using the terrain, ground itself to build an undulating wall, undulating space. You can walk it, but a car or truck, it's the top of that peak that pulls forward and it's not going to go in front and stop. So it doesn't look like Fort Knox. It looks kind of cool. You can add all kinds of outside things to it for bushes and lights and trees. But well, can do a lot of things for it. So look at that risk assessment. You can talk to the specialists that look at know what's going on. That looks at the access control and things like concession stands. There's money in it, so how do you protect that? The 5 Ds, multiple layers of security: deter, detect, deny, delay, and defend, in that order. So as you look at that, as you start talking to security people, or if you've got them on your own teams, identify those 5 Ds. We call them rings, and how we look at that security zone. So, winding down the lines here. The AV multimedia side, we talked about a lot of that. The game views, localization in terms of what that's doing, that phenomenon, and how it plays into those design pieces for it. Cross media, marketing. It's all part of what you're doing by bringing a game into your facility or you're building one for someone else. How do they market it? So look at that in terms of how that guy deals with the audiovisual systems. Game audio, game video, visual effects, lighting, animation, things we've talked about already. And at the end of the day, plan your work, report your plan. So if you don't plan to expand, you didn't plan your work. As we look at large arenas, and we talked about this briefly on the front end, they aren't all large arenas day one. The big arenas that I've seen in the States here now is probably 4. And there's probably 400 that we've seen just recently in college university alone, much less the public amount of comp shops that are building, 15 station workstations, they rent them out by the hour. So you're starting to see a lot of that. You're seeing the same thing with the Great America, some of the theme parks. We were just talking about that earlier too. Getting into it now because there's space, there's availability, and they've got the throughput of people that are coming into these spaces already. So let's expand that. Words of wisdom that I have to carry for you, but that's as far as I can take it today. So with that, QR code up there, that's my credit, it's my business card. So if anybody's interested, feel free. I'm glad to answer any questions I can anytime.